I had a tough time coming up with a topic for my second video this month, not least because November is kind of a weird month in the UK. We don't really have any major holidays until Christmas, and we're surrounded by the usually suffocating remembrance poppy stuff. Then the US election happened, and everyone is gonna make a video about that. Making a video about it felt kind of like I might accidentally rub salt in some wounds without meaning to, so I ruled that out. And then I ruled out talking about poppy fascism because if I was going to do that, I'd have to drop it on Remembrance Sunday. And I decided to publish the John Ashworth video then, which, no regrets. So I was massively relieved when people informed me that a list of video games existed and it's about what games are woke or aren't woke, with some extremely curious criteria and categorization and evidence. Yes, they even tried to present evidence for it, and the list is very, very funny. The group that made this spreadsheet has very few members, around a couple thousand dedicated weirdos who are members of this group, which means that it is a group who do not matter. Even so, I feel a little conflicted about just doing a straight dunk on it, especially and perhaps a little ironically in light of the discourses that have followed the US election, particularly commentary about young men, especially young white men. I mean, you've all heard it. And I'm not unsympathetic. I just think the things people are talking about as problems exist across demographic lines. So here's the deal. In order to soothe my guilt about exposing people to this group, we're going to do the dunking, because of course we are. But first, let's do a little bit of eating our meat and vegetables, or just vegetables if you're vegan or vegetarian. I want to think about why someone would join a group like this. What are they getting out of it? And what does preemptively labeling media actually do for you? As I said, this is a small group, but I think it's a great microcosm of a lot of things that people are suddenly trying to pay attention to with no idea about what any of it actually does for people. If you're around my age, you've most likely been in more than a few online communities. You probably know people who you've kept in contact with across multiple platforms, and you may not even know who those people are. They're just a username and an avatar you recognize. I mention this because recently I was hanging out with some people who I knew from an online community. It's kind of my own online community, weirdly. But also, I wanted to ask you this question. Why do you join online communities? Speaking purely for myself, it's usually because it means there's a space where I can talk to people who share an interest with me. You might think that you don't join online communities because you never make an account or you never post, but that doesn't make you any less a part of it. Anything from happening to follow a group of people associated with a subculture or interest to being one of those people who are followed means being a part of a community. I remember a time when I was invited to an event as press, which is very funny when you think about it for more than a few seconds. I was chatting to a friend who was invited to speak at this event, and we were talking in a pub. One of the parts of that conversation I remember very clearly because I maybe had a drink or two too many, so the rest of the night was kind of blurry, was us both saying that the actual events and the talks at that event weren't why we were there. We were there, to quote my eloquent self about it, to chat shit. It was all about chatting shit. And that's really all it is for about 95% of us at the end of the day. Chatting shit and getting the fourth worst hangover of your life in a city you've never been to. God, I miss being invited to stuff like that. It was a good time. It was a very good time. Let's be more specific and talk about why someone might join this community. The obvious argument is because of the same things you talked about earlier, SK, which is completely true. But this is an explicitly political group, and those tend to have a harder time attracting people because politics in your hobby is just kind of exhausting. And I'm not saying that in a please stop making these things political way. I just mean that when pints in Nottingham cost £6, that maybe I need more relaxing ways to discuss hobbies than what this group would likely provide. Especially since, as we'll get into later, it's just people looking for stuff to get upset at. Perhaps this is why membership is relatively low, a combination of needing to be motivated, or I'd say be a radicalized person, and the fact that explicit politics is a bit of a turnoff. To give an example, let's say there are two discussion boards, both about the E&M Bank's Culture series. One is just a discussion board that talks primarily about the books and interesting things in them. The other is called something like The Red Culture and is full of insistence that the culture is all about a theoretical, fully automated luxury gay space, communism, and belief in that is a minimum price of entry into the community. Even if you believe that, which one are you more likely to join? The one that doesn't have a massive stick up its ass about what you need to believe? Obviously, that one, right? When we look at the Woke Content Detector group, we have to understand that to even enter this community in a remotely sincere way, you have to buy into its core premise, which is apparently that not only is there woke messaging in video games that's contributing to ruining it as a hobby for you, but that it is somehow essential that these materials be catalogued, with members of the community dissuaded from even engaging with some of them because of this. I was going to say because of woke, and that would have scanned better, so I kind of regret not saying that. This is despite their insistence that these judgments aren't about whether a game is good or bad, just woke, which does raise the question as to why ratings are framed as related to whether a game is recommended or not. In any case, yes, this group is still about the chatting shit. You can go look in their forum and see that. But in order to enter it, you do have to come pre-prepared for its assumptions, or you have to be willing to internalize it to some extent. So we understand why someone might want to join an online community. Why would you join this online community? It's a good question, because to me it feels like it'd be kind of stress-inducing. And if you're like me, you have more than enough sources of stress in your life. Why seek out another? I have some speculation, and one thought I had was answered by a simple but quite challenging question. How much control do you have in your life? Just think about that for a second. How much of your life, your circumstances, is really under your direct control? You might say, well, I have a decent paying job, an apartment, and I can do most of the things I want. But how secure is that really? I'm not trying to jinx anyone watching this, or myself, but you could lose your job. Your landlord might evict you. You could be hit by a car tomorrow. So many things about our life are in the hands of other people and systems, both natural and man-made, but are just impossible for us to exercise any real control over. We might be able to influence them, but not much else. That can be a really immobilizing and kind of depressing thought. For most of us, though, I think we just try to do the best we can with the things that we can control, and that at least works to some extent, crossing bridges if and when we come to them. And it's important to note that most of us who feel like parts of our lives are beyond our control don't do this. Well, if you're not satisfied with what you can control with your life, you might try to exercise control in other ways. At this point, though, I want to point out, if the aspect of your life that you can't control that's bothering you the most is, video games aren't to my liking because I have to see gay characters, then you're probably leading an incredibly charmed life. Like, good for you, I guess. Go do something else with it. That's what I think is offered by this. 2,000 random people can't control what's produced by the games industry, but they can construct an illusion of meaningful action by discouraging playing certain games. None of this actually cures what's ailing you, though, but that's not really the point of a list or a community like this. The point is to reinforce the notions you entered this community with and keep hitting at the anxieties that brought you to it. Remember when I said that this community felt stressful and just describing it is making me feel a little anxious? But it's also encouraging patterns of thought that will make the members feel worse. If I thought that there was an all encompassing conspiracy to force certain issues into the media in a way that makes the media worse and politically threatening, the last thing I'd want to do is consume or think about that media. At least if my goal was just to do the things that I enjoy. I'll be clear in a little bit when we get to the dunking that I don't think that these people have actually engaged with the games they're rating, but encouraging this sense of conspiracy and being able to discredit an entire work by just applying a label to it at least gives you a sense of actual power and control. Imagine for a second that there actually was this grand conspiracy and you were working in a plucky volunteer group to undermine it. Wouldn't that kind of rule? I mean, it's kind of the storyline for a bunch of video games, so I can see how this happens, but it'd encourage you to keep going. In any case, I'm reminded of something I said in probably a lot of videos by now, which is that depiction isn't endorsement, but I think in this case, I think people can't quite grasp that depiction isn't a conspiracy. We'll see some examples of how deep this mindset goes because they fixate on some really trivial things as evidence, like the kind of thing someone well down a rabbit hole would point to. Also, they miss like really big, glaring, obvious stuff under this framework, but we'll get to it, I promise. I think it's important, though, to just note that before we get to the real fun, that this stuff is a radicalization technique, controlling what media, or at least trying to discourage certain media consumption habits, because, you know, they don't really have a way to check, so it is just like trying. This is pretty much cult shit, though. I just want us to bear that in mind when we look at some examples, since it's important to me that we try to learn something here. I also want to say, before we get into the proper dunking bit, that I'm not unconvinced that this is just an elaborate prank, but in case it's not, this community sucks and it should be laughed at. If you're in this community and watching this, I'm sorry that I'm laughing at you, and I'm probably not going to be an exit point for you from this weird, sad shit that you're doing, but I hope you realize how fucking odd this is, and honestly, maybe watching this next part will help you realize it. Let's turn to the spreadsheet by first talking about methodology. To the rare credit of this group, they actually do have a methodology. Handily, they do provide a definition of woke, followed by a long list best summarized as anything that's not related to a straight white man. This methodology is littered with, hey, if you disagree, feel free to join, and we're not trying to decide for you or anything, which I do kind of believe that they believe this, that they're just providing contextual information that you should use as a starting point. It's hard to reconcile that with the language around their ratings. Like, if I were to tell you that a restaurant was not recommended, I think you'd maybe take that as not necessarily an instruction, but a pretty strong signal that you shouldn't go there. I do kind of believe them when they say that this list is not about whether a game is good or bad, just because, as I said earlier, they're trying to dismiss entire works, but also because it's pretty obvious in some cases that they've just not played the games, even the ones they recommend. The obvious place to start for me would be the games I've done videos about on this channel, just because those are games I've had to play or extensively look into. If you're interested in those, there's a whole playlist with all my other media related stuff. The games I've talked about on this channel are Fallout New Vegas, Suzerain, Disco Elysium, Dragon Age Origins, Hard Space Shipbreaker, Victoria 3, Sonic Adventures 1 and 2, and Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. So I know you just can't wait to hear how many of these games are woke, and the answer is that 3 haven't been reviewed as of writing, 4 are informational, which I kind of put as like kind of woke, and only 2 are woke enough to not be recommended. Now, my videos about these games weren't necessarily primarily political in and of themselves, but it's kind of funny to see some of the overlaps here, but also what they missed. Take Sonic Adventure DX. I was kind of surprised that they got it was subtly anti-colonial. I honestly would not have expected them to get that, because when I brought up this kind of thing, it was what I thought was a massive stretch for the sake of a gimmicky video, but fair enough. I still think the list overall was pretty dumb, but hey, I can at least believe that they've maybe played the game, which is more than I can say for some of the other ones. I still stand by my overall position that a game that is fundamentally a cartoon has limited commentary on these things beyond just having some fun with it, but whatever. It's their list. You know how it goes. Another one where I can't really complain is what they've seen in Hard Space Shipbreaker, which is a great game for what it is and has one of the best soundtracks ever. I cannot praise it enough. They've recognized it is overtly anti-capitalist, which, yeah, it is. There's no easier way to illustrate that capitalism kind of sucks than setting it in space. So, you know, any capitalist with space colonization ambitions are ones to be extra suspicious of. Look, the game isn't subtle. The company literally makes you pay for your oxygen. Your conditions are abysmal. Figuring this one out isn't a high bar to clear, but I am to some extent relieved they cleared it. I just don't agree that you shouldn't play this game. I think it's a great way to pass some time, and the politics is overt, but you don't necessarily have to pay attention to it. I'm just saying, give the game a try, it's really good. But that's obviously where these guys go wrong. Criticizing their favorite economic system is like a red rag to a bull for them. One recent video I did that I really enjoyed was about a specific questline on Tatooine in Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, which was decolonial and a really well-constructed and thought-out quest for the time, and there's repeated instances of racism being depicted as explicitly evil in the game because of the moral framework that George Lucas imposed on the Star Wars galaxy. You can free slaves, you can resist a colonizer. Of course, you can also side with the slavers and the big evil corporation that wants to do genocide. It's just that the game judges you. These are all things that you'd think they'd be really interested in highlighting for their overly sensitive members. They don't, which is one of those things that makes me think that asking people to think critically about media isn't necessarily a worthwhile endeavor, because even when they try, they just don't. It also makes me think that they didn't really play the game. Again, this is going to be a recurring problem, or just don't recognize these things for some reason. What they got mad about in KOTOR was that one of the companion characters is LGBTQ+, and is therefore subtly pro-LGBTQ+. Now, depiction isn't necessarily an endorsement, but the game doesn't break the fourth wall to tell you that this is somehow inherently good or evil. It's just a fact about a character. A fact that I genuinely didn't remember as one of the most important things about her, which maybe I just have a bad memory. I'm going to be real. This could just be me having a bad memory. So they've ignored all this interesting narrative where the game does break the fourth wall to tell you whether things are good or bad via light or dark side points, and have gotten really mad about a lesbian being in a game. Presumably because the game doesn't make a value judgment about it, or even treat it as particularly important. Okay, so of the games I've spoken about on the channel, this one has the funniest entry. Disco Elysium, which is a lot of things and has had a bunch of controversy around it that I'm not really going to get into, is described as woke, which, considering this is a game where you can literally be a fascist, but admittedly the game treats fascism as a laughable ideology, but so do a lot of people in real life, but that doesn't mean it's any less harmful. But yeah, the game is definitely woke, I'm going to be honest with you. It is also a game where your character can just be a lot of things, often contradictory things, and that's part of its charm. It's a really good representation of people's complex internal worlds, And it does have diverse characters, black characters, women, LGBTQ plus characters, because, that's how the world is. And I don't really see what's woke about that, but that's not the funniest part. They described the game as having heavy social commentary regarding communism. Whether pro or anti is unclear. Now, just before I break down into laughter, just 10 out of 10, no notes. I can't really add to this because it's hard to understand what's happened here. But I think they've just seen mentions of communism and gotten so mad they couldn't parse what the game was trying to say, which in some ways makes me think the game is too good at what it intended to do. There are games where I just don't think they've engaged with the material. KOTOR was one I mentioned earlier, but my partner pointed out Horizon Zero Dawn, a game I've never played, but she has. When I looked at the entry, it was informational, which just means the usual crying about LGBTQ plus characters. There is, however, a specific one that if they'd noticed it, she thinks it would have pushed it into not recommended. Again, remember that I have not played the game, so anything I say is I'm just guessing here based on what I've been told. But there is a character in the game called Janova, whose gender is ambiguous and they have no preferred pronouns, but we do know definitely that they're not a woman. And given the bald ape guy screaming about gender ambiguity when he was playing Starfield, you'd think they'd have picked up on this, assuming they'd engaged with the material at all. I don't have a lot to say about this one. My partner's played the game, and I haven't. Plus, I've seen no pop culture spillover from it, because I guess the game's not that popular. I don't know. But yeah, according to my partner, they've just not engaged with the game at all. Fine, I guess. She gets her moment in the sun in the video. Good for her. Another great example is Middle-earth: Shadow of War, which demonstrates a few big patterns. First, it will not surprise you to know that the game is woke, according to the list. Why? Because it shows out-of-place diversity, which I can't really muster the energy to say this with the venom it deserves, but it's a world with elves, hobbits, orcs, and dwarves. There's no such thing. I'm also a little confused as to what they mean. Do they think the orcs are too diverse? I mean, they certainly have character in the game. Is it that the big ones, the Ologs, have Russian accents? Just bizarre. But here's where I start to really go off the rails. They claim 2 of the Nazgul have been race and gender swapped in the game. And now I have to be that kind of nerd about it. Firstly, this game is in a separate timeline or canon to the books and movies, so these are not those Nazgul. If you'd played the game, you'd understand that this is necessarily true. Secondly, we only definitely know the gender of one Nazgul, and I will grant you another one because it's heavily implied. Camel the Easterling and the Witch King of Angmar. Now, I know what you're going to say, but the bit at the start of Lord of the Rings, it's the starting bit. And let me ask you a question back. Which of these men is Camel the Easterling? I guess you could make an argument for the guys on the left here, but largely these are white men, and I'd have a hard time affirmatively identifying any of these as Camel the Easterling. Is this DEI on behalf of white actors who look vaguely like a medieval king? No one can say. Maybe the Lord of the Rings films are woke. I don't know. I don't want to start encouraging other lists because of this, but anyway. The gender isn't specified. They never say where the recipients of the rings were from, and the Ringverse doesn't even name these people as kings, at least if I'm remembering correctly, which funnily was a title that was held specifically by women. And no, I don't mean queen, I mean king. These were women called king. But even if you say the 9 rings were given to kings specifically, rings change hand? It's literally the basis of the entire fucking story of Lord of the Rings. In fact, if I recall correctly, the 2 women in the game who become Nazgul do so after taking the rings. It's just an absolute shambles. It really reminds me of everyone who had a strong opinion about women's space marines who clearly hadn't been interested in 40k before that particular controversy. Just 0 out of 10. Fucking read a fucking book. Just once in your life. Next, we have one that is laser focused on making me mad. Let me show you this image of Suleiman from Civilization 6, and this one from Civilization 5. So this is apparently Suleiman being race swapped. Have people just never seen a Turkish person before? Like, both of these Suleimans just look kind of like Turkish people. Like, my dad, when he has a tan, looks like Civ 6 Suleiman. Maybe a bit less sharply dressed, but still pretty similar skin tone, if that's what they're angling at. I feel like this was just, like, really precisely focused on me for some reason. Though I will say it is interesting that in the great Are Turks white debate, the list makers seem to think they're white. And I don't really want to litigate this too much, but come on guys, really? What race do you think he's been swapped to? Going outside for more than an hour a day? That's not a fucking racial group. I'm sorry, it's just not. The other one with this game is that they seem to think that there are historically insignificant women rulers. There's no way to say this without being mean, so I'm just going to lean into it here. Every single woman ruler in this game is more significant than every person in that Steam group. Also, having had a cursory look at the female leaders in the game, bearing in mind that I've not played Civ since Civ 4, I'm just going to put this out there for you. It was just a quick look, right? Just because you've not heard of someone doesn't mean that they're not significant. Now we come to one of the entries that just makes me think, you're fucking with us, right? Because they have an entry for Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales. Now, looking at this cover for the game, who might we conclude is the main character? I'll give you a few seconds to lock in your guess. If you answered Miles Morales, you're right. Now, guess what their complaint was? Miles Morales, a person of color, was overshadowing Peter Parker. Now, there's so much exhausting shite with this one, but look at the title of the game, you weirdos. If the game was called Spider-Man Peter Parker and it was all about Miles Morales, you'd still be a weirdo for fixating on it, but it'd be more of a marketing fuck-up to commentate on. Like, none of this matters. Moving on, you know how whenever we hear about free speech, conservatives are never really specific about what speech they want to protect? Well, these lot are a lot less shy about it. If you draw your attention to the entry for Gary's mod, you'll see that the game is woke. No surprise there, I guess. But look a bit closer and you'll see they have anti-free speech messaging. And it seems to be because they banned Nazism. Which, you know, these people aren't really hiding it, and if you need this one explained to you, then I can't really help you. I'm sorry. Like, I just can't. Let's wrap up with a couple of fun ones that really do cement that I think they're just fucking with us. Do you remember Spyro, the game about that dragon where you burn the sheep and then the dragonfly that hangs out with you eats a butterfly? That is a really poor description of the game now I think about it. But it's a children's game that has a pretty neat platformer underneath that exterior. Good, clean fun. What could be wrong with it? The remaster for it is woke. Why? Because a line of dialogue has been changed where this moneybags asshole, who I just really hate, honestly, just a loathsome character. I cannot explain how much I fucking hate that guy. He has had a line of dialogue where he talks about spending money on flirtatious fawns removed. Was this an essential part of the game's experience? Like, did you as a child, when you first played this game, conceptually understand what was being angled at here? Like, I was like 7 when I played Spyro for the first time, and I don't think I even remember this line being in the game, to be honest. There's also the usual paranoia about other things, but this stood out. Does this really matter? It does go to show that sometimes you can't parody these people. Humor changes over time, and I guarantee you that another type of conservative thought that often overlaps with the kind on display here would have been fucking furious if they'd kept this and exposed children to it. One last one, I promise one last one, then you can forget about this list. Let me start this one with the complaint. This game has a subtly anti-human message, which means it's categorized as informational. Can you Guess which game? I'll give you a sec. It's Destroy All Humans. Which, what part of that is subtle? And do you think this is real? Like, do you think that the Furons, I think that's the name of the alien race in the game, it's been years, are part of some communist conspiracy to annihilate mankind, and this game is supposed to indoctrinate you into supporting it? It's exhausting to even look into the mindset of these people. I can't imagine being them, so let's wrap it up. I'm done. I've had, it's late. I want to go to bed. I'm done. I like to end the videos by thinking about what we've learned. And to be honest, did we learn anything? I don't think so. And that's fine, by the way. But one thing I think we did learn maybe is that these people are trying to wind themselves up. Beyond being a cautionary tale, I don't really see what we take away from this other than the fact that I was right to hate that Moneybags guy from Spyro. But not because of him spending money on flirtatious forms, just to be clear, but because he's a capitalist. And I fucking hate that guy. Just the worst. Okay, more seriously. I think with some of the more ridiculous examples, we saw the natural conclusion of falling into this radicalized mindset. You end up chasing shadows based on what makes you in particular angry. You could argue that this whole video is me falling right into that mindset, but I like to think that I conveyed that I had maybe a frustrating time, but a good time generally doing this. It's always fun to see what the dregs of the internet are up to, and I think this worked as some relatively light content, so I could take it easy. And on that note, you'll take it easy. I'll catch you on the next video. I need to thank my proofreader, who is my partner, who read through this script on 2 separate occasions, because I did not write this one normally because it just seemed like I just couldn't bring myself to do it. But I also need to thank my patrons and members. Do join the Patreon, patreon.com/SKTheCrusader, or become a YouTube member so that you can get early access. You can vote on the topics of the videos. You can even suggest topics to me, or get your name shouted out at the end of the video like the top tier patrons: Drone Riff, Mercutio, Kersley Scheider, John N, and Liron. Special shout out to them, absolute legends. And our YouTube members: Nadir Jiwa, Katie Marshall, Roger Zugi, absolute legends, all of them. Please remember to like and subscribe. Leave a comment. I'll have a link to the spreadsheet down below. Go find the most fucked up thing they have in there and just report back to me. Go for it. You'll all be able to find something that will astonish me, I'm sure. And yeah, that's the video. I'll catch you all on the next one. Take it easy. Yeah, it's an Alien Ant Farm shirt. We're just gonna have to move past it.